Today I am going to break the cycle and talk about Northwestern football. So why don't you, whether you're a Northwestern fan and cheer for the Wildcats, whether you're a Big Ten fan, or if you're just a college football fan in general, sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. And before we get into it, I want you to hit that subscribe button, hit the like button, comment your thoughts on Northwestern football down below while the video is going, and like this video. Northwestern football is underrated. They are never talked about. They are not given any amount of attention. And for coming off their worst season tied with the 2019 season in the Pat Fitzgerald era, it sort of makes sense. But then you look back. Let's say you pull up Pat Fitzgerald on Wikipedia, you scroll down to his head coaching record. In 2018 and 2020, there's a blue shade over those seasons, which indicate a conference division title and or a championship game berth, both of which Northwestern had in those 2 seasons. And you begin to realize, if you dig more into Northwestern football, with the amount of restrictions for recruiting and transfer portal purposes that Pat Fitzgerald has, it's unbelievable. And the amount of academic restrictions for high school recruiting is also unbelievable. Severely limits the talent pool. Michigan fans, I'm a Michigan fan myself, my fan base pretends that we are like Northwestern or Vanderbilt. It's not true. We do have some academic restrictions. They really only affect incoming transfers, to be honest with you. Northwestern and a school like Vanderbilt, let's say, and let's say Stanford too, even though Stanford has pulled off some very high recruiting classes. Nonetheless, they have restrictions in the high school realm of recruiting too. I have no doubt on that. I'm not an expert on that per se. I don't know the exact restrictions they have, but I've heard about them, and I very much believe that they do. They have restrictions, severely limits the talent pool. They're a smaller private university. They don't have the exact same resources. And we'll talk more about how I think those resources are either growing or shrinking. I think there are opportunities for both of those with the NIL and the transfer portal if we're talking about talent resources in a few minutes. But Pat Fitzgerald, I think overall, maybe not in the current moment, but overall is probably a top 10 head coach. Just looking at his resume, his current tenure, there are tough changes that are coming right now. The transfer portal is a year or two old thing in its current form, and NIL is not even a year old. It's crazy. But you look at his resume, what he has done, 3 10-win seasons, which all had top 25 finishes. In fact, he had won 10-2 regular season. It resulted in a blowout loss in the Outback Bowl, but a 10-2 regular season in 2015, losing to a 10-3 Michigan squad and losing to a 12-2 Iowa squad, beating ranked Wisconsin, beating a Stanford team that later won the Rose Bowl and beat Iowa. It's fascinating. The job that he does with so little talent fascinates me. It makes my nerves and my brain work. It's awe-inspiring is probably the best word to put it. In 2017, he starts 2-3 and he finishes 10-3. In 2018, probably one of his best seasons. If you look at just how his team recovered, they started out 1-3, which included heartbreaking losses to Duke, Akron, and Michigan. And then they finish 9-5, being competitive with Notre Dame, beating ranked Iowa, ranked Wisconsin, ranked Michigan State at the time, being competitive for a few quarters against Ohio State, who went 13-1 that year, and then beating Utah in the Holiday Bowl. That competitive game against Ohio State was in the Big Ten championship game, too. Northwestern finished first in the West in 2018, and they clinched their spot in Indy. I think they clinched it, like a week before their final game. They clinched it November 21st. Maybe I'm wrong, but it didn't come down to the last game. That's how impressive they were in conference play in 2018. It was absolutely unbelievable. They lost all 3 of their non-conference games, yet were very competitive and dominant in conference play. 2019, they went 3-9. It was a disaster season. Their only win was at Illinois. It was not a very good team. They had a tough schedule, but still lost a lot of games. Wasn't a good year. No one had any expectations for them in 2020, and they get back to Indy again with an all-conference slate. They only lost on the road to Michigan State in a total upset, but they beat top 10 Wisconsin the week before that. They were very competitive and led number 4 Ohio State in Indy. Ohio State later went on to win a playoff game, crushing Clemson, and then getting crushed by possibly one of the greatest teams of all time in 2020 Alabama in the national title. And then this past year, we all know they went 3-9. Why am I mentioning all this and going through the seasons? Because it's important. Because this guy, and by this guy I mean Pat Fitzgerald, does a fantastic job. And he can come out of nowhere. He can come out of the tiniest of crevices, out of the darkest of caves, out of impossible situations, starting 2-3, starting 1-3, and do fantastic things. It's unreal. In 2020, you wouldn't think that a team that lost to 2020 MSU would reach the Big Ten championship game and compete with Ohio State, because Michigan didn't, and that was the only other game in which 2020 MSU won. It's the same thing in 2018. When you lose to Akron, when you lose to Duke, do you think that that team is going to, let alone win the West? Because even though the West isn't as strong as the East, it's still very competitive. It's not a MAC league. You wouldn't think that. But he comes out of these impossible situations and does and achieves what seems to be impossible with seemingly next to nothing. You look at ourlads.com for Northwestern's depth chart, no defensive tackles are listed. They have some incoming transfers, but depth is a problem. We won't know. I guarantee you right now we don't know a lot of players who are going to be starting, especially with the disaster of this past season. And Pat Fitzgerald is a competitive guy. He wants to win, but it's going to be hard. Is this the end for Northwestern football under Pat Fitzgerald? And I ask that because the NIL and the transfer portal. NIL is interesting for Northwestern because they're a small school. They're a private school. They have restrictions. So in that aspect, it's going to be harder. But you know what's easier? And I read this in an article. You're in Chicago. You're in Chicago, one of the largest cities in America, on Lake Michigan. You have incredible business opportunity, and you have it to yourself. You have Chicago to yourself. Now, yes, the Chicago Bears are there. Other professional sports teams are there, but for college, it's yours. Honestly, it's yours. Illinois, they're down south. Notre Dame is in Indiana. Wisconsin is in Wisconsin. And this may sound like redundant points, like mute points, but when you have a city as large as Chicago and you're the only college football team who's in a certain sense like close to it, or rather inside of it, that's opportunity right there. There's plethora of business opportunity there. So I'm very curious to see if Northwestern is going to try and take advantage of that. Especially the Chicago Bears are in a down. They're in a down period. They have had very little success. In fact, less success than Northwestern football has had in college. They've had less success in the NFL by record and expectations, if we're being very honest. So if Northwestern can turn this around, get back to winning and stop going 3-9 and the Bears keep struggling, you can have an even bigger market potential. So I'm very interested. But NIL also hurts you because NIL, when it relates to the portal, you see that if you're good, for example, you're good at Northwestern and you have more limits. The classes are harder. For now, at the current moment, you probably can't make as much money as you could at other schools, and you're going to get paid less attention to by NFL scouts. You just are, because it's a smaller school. You have less success than, let's say, a school like Notre Dame to the east of you, or Wisconsin to the north of you, or Iowa to the west of you. You see where I'm going? Northwestern is stuck in the middle of several teams around it that will get more attention from NFL scouts. Their players will get more money from business deals, at least at the current moment, from things that I understand. And that's why, the likely reason, though I haven't looked into it deep, it's why a kid like Brandon Joseph leaves you. It's absolutely why. It's why, how good of a player he was. He was great, especially in 2020. That's why he leaves to a school like Notre Dame, who is still prestigious in athletics, but is overall better football program. They have more talent. You're going to get a lot more attention from NFL scouts, and they probably have the better, I would imagine at least, they have the better NIL situation. So I'm curious to see how it's all going to affect Northwestern. So far, it seems to be affecting them in a negative way, though, and I think that's going to be the case, at least in the short term. We'll see about the long term in a few years. Very hard to predict that. I like Hilinski and Skornowski. Hilinski's a quarterback at Northwestern. Skornowski is a big-time tackle prospect who I think is Northwestern's only 5-star recruit. That's according to 24/7 Sports. Not their composite where he was listed as a 4-star, but the 24/7 Sports rankings alone. But where is the offense for Northwestern? Last year, the Wildcats struggled on all sides of the ball, granted. And from the beginning, I was not high on Michigan State earlier in the year. Michigan State looked impressive against Northwestern. By a few games before the Michigan game, I discovered that, they're legit. They just have to be. But from that first Michigan State game, I could tell this team was not what many predicted them to be. They weren't. They just weren't. Losing 38-21 in the opener and struggling especially on offense, only scoring 16.6 points per game, which is 125th out of 130 teams. It's atrocious. It is absolutely atrocious. Ryan Hilinski, who is likely now going to be the starter, 6'3", 225 pounds. He only threw for 978 yards this past season, 3 touchdowns, 4 picks, had a 35.6 QB rating according to ESPN, barely above 100 passer rating. Those are horrible stats, and part of it's the supporting cast, the lack thereof. Part of it's probably also, not going to lie, coaching, development, etc. The offense has to improve if this team is going to improve. And can the defense recover with Brandon Joseph leaving? The defense was much better, at least when it comes to national rankings. They were 89th out of 130, which is still bad, but it's a better defense despite having a terrible offense. It's a much better defense, better managed and coordinated than, let's say, Maryland's and a plethora of other teams. They're not bottom 40. They're around bottom 40, but they're not. Whereas the offense is, quite frankly, bottom 5, which certainly doesn't help your defense, is that means your defense is going to be asked to win you every game when your offense is that bad. And in the modern era, especially in Big Ten play, when the Big Ten is finally becoming more of an offensive conference, which is why you're seeing a team like Wisconsin, and why I think this season you'll see Iowa take a step back. We've already seen it with Wisconsin. Iowa, it's not affected them yet. Part of that, I think, is the Kirk Ferentz factor. and just how good their secondary is, which a secondary is going to very well effectively counter. It's going to counter a good pass game. Same with the pass rush, which Iowa also has. But anyway, back to the main point. The defense is they're going to have to improve, because an offense going from 16.6 points a game, 125th in the country, it's going to take a big turnaround for the defense to not have to drastically improve or greatly improve to help Northwestern improve. Both sides have to really almost have a miracle for this team with the schedule they have, getting to the fourth topic, in order to have a good season. This schedule is brutal. Northwestern and the Cats, Pat Fitzgerald and company, open up against Nebraska August 27th in Dublin, Ireland. Now, this game I think will tell us something, because I think Nebraska this coming season is going to be fantastic. They're going to be, I think, a 9-10 win team. I'm leaning with 10, and they're going to win the West outright. Even with a game away against Michigan on their schedule, they're winning the West outright. That's my opinion. But it's a neutral site game. It's the opener. Scott Frost has not done well in openers in the past. Pat Fitzgerald, again, very solid coach, can surprise you. So I'm interested to see this game. Even though for now I'm going to put it as a loss, I think Nebraska will do very well and win in convincing fashion here. But that game, if it's a Northwestern win and Nebraska's still a solid team, it'll be very interesting to see how Northwestern does for the rest of the year. After August 27th, Northwestern has a bye September 3rd before hosting Duke September 10th and Southern Illinois September 17th and hosting Miami of Ohio September 24th. I think Duke, Southern Illinois, and Miami of Ohio will all be wins, but they will be the Wildcats' only wins. That's right. Look at the rest of the schedule. It sounds ridiculous. At Penn State, October 1st. Winnable game because I don't like James Franklin, and I don't think that Penn State is roster-wise, coaching-wise. Next year's going to be one of Penn State's roughest seasons, and that's including the 2020 season and the 2021 season. It's going to be rough for Penn State, in my opinion. But it's at Beaver Stadium. Penn State has a massive talent advantage. It's going to be tough to win. Hosting Wisconsin on homecoming, another winnable game, but again, talent advantage. Paul Chryst, even with the offensive ineptitude that he's overseen the past 2 years, he's still a solid coach, good X's and O's coach. It's going to be a hard-fought game. Northwestern has a bye October 15th before traveling to Maryland, who has a much better offense than Northwestern does, but another winnable game. From here on out, the schedule gets, I would say, very tough. It gets tougher. At Iowa, October 29th. Hosting Ohio State November 5th, which out of all of these games, this one is the least winnable by miles. At Minnesota, November 12th. At Purdue, November 19th. And hosting Illinois, who dominated Northwestern this past season, November 26th. That 4-game stretch at Iowa, hosting Ohio State, at Minnesota, and at Purdue, those are all losses. Same with every game in conference, in my opinion. And I want to give Pat Fitzgerald some benefit of the doubt, but none of these teams are horrible. In fact, Illinois is probably the only bad team on Northwestern's conference schedule. The only team that I could prescribe as bad or terrible. Maryland, I would say, is average. Penn State and Iowa are probably above average. And then Purdue and Minnesota, I would say, are good. I'd say Nebraska's great. And Ohio State is just, I have them as my number one team. So they're elite. And those are just my predictions. I could be totally wrong. But this schedule is tough. This would be one of Pat Fitzgerald's best coaching jobs if this team just goes bowling. If they go bowling with the roster they have, with the schedule they have, with the recruiting class coming in, which is 52nd overall, has the 84th transfer ranking, and the 48th high school exclusive ranking, if they go bowling with that schedule, this recruiting class, and the depth chart that they have, that is huge. That's amazing. That would, again, be Pat Fitzgerald's, I'd say, best coaching job, or one of his best. Just with the neighborhood getting tougher, again, the tough schedule, and the disaster that occurred this past season, where most had Northwestern going anywhere from bowling to possibly winning the West again. I didn't think, because of what they were losing, that they would win the West again, but I had them going, I think, 6-6. This past year was just a horrible disappointment, and I think Pat Fitzgerald would tell you no differently. But until proven otherwise, with the current situation of the roster, just seemingly the negative effect of the portal, Brandon Joseph, one of Northwestern's best players, leaving, it would take a lot for this team to go bowling, and even more, a near impossible task for this team to finish with a record above 7-6 or 8-5. For this team to reach the Big Ten championship game, for them to reach Indy, would be, I would say, nearly or completely an impossible feat. But I could be wrong. The games play out themselves. I love Pat Fitzgerald. I want him to stay at Northwestern forever, and I want to see him win a Big Ten title. I would love that. It would be one of the most epic stories of college football itself. And that's all I have to say for this video. If you're a Northwestern fan, I know I don't cover you a whole lot, but again, I cover Big Ten football, making some prediction videos in the near future. I'd really appreciate it if you could subscribe, but more importantly, just comment your thoughts on this video down below, and comment your thoughts on this team's upcoming season, how you think they'll do, what you like, what you dislike. Comment all of that down below. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you guys around. Bye.